an unexpected shelter. The wind bit through Sidney's thin jacket with a vengeance that felt personal. She huddled deeper into the bus stop bench, the plastic cold even through her layers. Another night, another nowhere to be. Her backpack, heavy, with every possession she owned, sat like an anchor at her feet. She was 21, but the 5 years on the streets had carved decades into her soul. Her stomach growled, a hollow, familiar ache she tried to ignore by counting the passing headlights. A sleek black luxury car, a silent phantom in the night, suddenly pulled to the curb just past her stop. It didn't fit. Not on this dimly lit street, not at this hour. Her instincts, sharpened by survival, went on high alert. She watched, motionless, as the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than a year of her non-existent rent. He ran a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of pure frustration before crouching down by the front tire. Sidney couldn't help the quiet snort that escaped her. Even from here, she could see it. Actually, she could see all 4 of them. Each tire was slashed, a series of vicious, deliberate gashes. This wasn't bad luck. This was a message. The man stood, pulling out his phone. The angry tapping of his thumb slowed, then stopped. He stared at the black screen, shook it, and let out a low, defeated curse that carried on the cold air. Stranded. Just like her. His gaze swept the empty street and landed on her. Sidney met his look head-on, her own eyes a flat, unimpressed gray. She was used to being looked through, not at. He seemed to be actually seeing her. The worn boots, the overstuffed pack, the exhaustion she wore like a second skin. He took a step toward the bus stop, his hands held slightly away from his body, a universal sign of non-confrontation. Rough night, he said, his voice a calm baritone that contrasted with the frustration on his face. You could say that, Sidney replied, her voice raspy from disuse. He gestured vaguely toward the crippled car. I seem to be stranded, and phoneless. Is there a chance I could borrow yours? I'd make it worth your while. Sidney barked a short, humorless laugh. Do I look like I have a phone? She nodded toward the car. Your ex? His eyebrows shot up in surprise, then his expression settled into a wry grimace. Is it that obvious? Only if the words furious and theatrical mean anything. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest. There's a gas station about 6 blocks that way. They have a payphone. Or so I've heard. He didn't move. Instead, he studied her more closely, and she saw the moment his CEO brain, the one that assessed situations and made deals, clicked into gear. How about a counteroffer, he said. A hot meal, my treat. Right there. He pointed to a brightly lit diner across the street, its windows promising warmth and food. In exchange for you coming with me so I can use the phone inside, and so I don't have to eat alone. Every survival instinct screamed at her to say no. Free meals came with strings, always. But the ache in her stomach was a louder, more primal scream. And there was something in his eyes. Not pity, but a weariness that mirrored her own. It was the lack of pity that decided her. One meal, she said, standing and shouldering her pack. And you use the phone. Then we're done. Deal, he said. His name was Jason, he told her once they were seated in a worn vinyl booth. The diner was blissfully warm, smelling of coffee and grease. He ordered 2 of the specials without asking what it was, and 2 coffees. He made the call to a service, arranging for a new car and a tow truck, his voice efficient and calm. When he hung up, he looked at her properly. I'm Sidney, she offered, because it felt like an exchange was due. Jason, he said. Thank you. For this. He gestured between them. The food arrived, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of quiet eating. Sidney tried to maintain her dignity, but the first bite of hot, real food was a physical relief that made her want to cry. She kept her eyes on her plate, methodically working her way through the meal. You're not from around here, Jason stated, not unkindly. Not for a long time, she evaded, taking a sip of the bitter, wonderful coffee. He didn't push. Instead, he told her about his own night, about the charity gala he'd left, about the escalating texts from his ex, Amber, that he'd ignored. I should have seen this coming, he admitted, a trace of self-recrimination in his voice. She has a flair for the dramatic. Slashing tires is more than dramatic, Sidney said, finally looking up. It's unhinged. A faint smile touched his lips. Yes, it is. He fell silent for a moment, watching her. Where will you go after this? The question hung in the air. Sidney just shrugged, a practiced, non-committal gesture. Around, Jason leaned back, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. I'm going to make another offer, he said, his tone careful, measured. And I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no. He waited for her guarded nod. One night, in a clean, safe hotel room, paid for by me. No strings, no expectations. You get a key. The door locks from the inside. You can leave anytime. You get one night off the street, a hot shower, and a real bed. That's it. Sidney stared at him, the last piece of toast frozen halfway to her mouth. Her mind raced, looking for the angle, the trap. There was always a trap. But his gaze was steady, his offer clear and contained. It was the no strings that undid her, the door locks from the inside. He was offering safety, not ownership. Why? The word was out before she could stop it, laced with 5 years of suspicion. Because it's cold, he said simply, and because I can. It was that simple, honest answer that broke through her defenses. A hot shower, a real bed. The temptation was a physical ache deeper than hunger. She thought of the relentless chill, the constant vigilance, the gritty feeling of never being truly clean. One night, she whispered, her voice thick. One night, he confirmed. After he paid the bill, he walked with her to a respectable mid-tier hotel a few blocks away. True to his word, he paid for a single night in cash, handed her the key card, and didn't ask for her room number. There's a coffee shop next door. I'll be there at 8 tomorrow morning. If you want to come, come. If not, he shrugged. No hard feelings. She stood in the clean, quiet hallway, the key card feeling like a winning lottery ticket in her hand. She locked the door and slid the chain into place. The room was modest, but to her it was a palace. The bed was impossibly soft. The bathroom was gleaming. She stood under the shower until the water ran cold, washing away layers of grime and a fraction of her weariness. That night, she slept deeper than she had in years, the silence a blessing, the lock on the door a promise. The next morning, her feet carried her to the coffee shop at 5 minutes to 8. She was clean, her hair still damp, her clothes the same but feeling less like a prison uniform. Jason was already there, 2 steaming mugs on the table. He looked up as she entered, and she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes before his usual composure returned. Good morning, he said, pushing one of the mugs toward her. Morning, she said, sitting down. He didn't waste time. Final offer, he said. I own a company. We have an entry-level position open in our data entry department. It's simple, monotonous work. It pays a living wage and comes with benefits. I will give you a 30-day trial. You'll be treated like any other new hire. You succeed or fail on your own merit. If, after your first paycheck, you want to walk away, you can. This, he gestured between them, never happened. Sidney wrapped her hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into her bones. A job. A real, honest-to-goodness job. It was the latter she had given up hope of ever seeing. He wasn't offering her a mansion or a credit card. He was offering her a chance to build her own. It was the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for her. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll take it. The first week at the company was a blur of forms, training videos, and a maze of cubicles. True to his word, Jason was a distant presence. She saw him once, walking through the office with a group of suits, and he gave no sign of recognition. She was assigned a workstation and a login, and she dove into the mind-numbing work of inputting numbers with a fierce concentration. It was boring, it was repetitive, and it was the most wonderful thing she'd ever done. She had a purpose. She had a place to be. A few weeks in, as Sidney was leaving for the day, a woman stepped in front of her just outside the building's lobby. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, dressed in expensive clothes, her eyes blazing. "You must be the new project," the woman said, her voice dripping with venom. Sidney stopped, her body going still. She didn't need an introduction. This was Amber. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sidney said, her voice flat. "Don't play dumb," Amber sneered, stepping closer. "Jason always has a charity case. He gets bored. He'll use you up and toss. You back. Trust me, I know." Sidney didn't flinch. She'd faced down threats far more tangible than a jealous ex. She met Amber's gaze with a cool, detached calm that seemed to unnerve the other woman. "You slashed his tires," Sidney stated, no question in her tone. "That's not love. That's a tantrum. He's not yours, and I'm not a project. I'm an employee. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm leaving." The sheer, unshakable composure seemed to deflate Amber's anger, leaving behind only petty frustration. She muttered something under her breath and stalked away. Sidney watched her go, her heart rate steady. She hadn't needed Jason to protect her. She had protected herself and the new life she was building. Months drifted by, turning seasons. Sidney thrived. The monotony of data entry gave way to small responsibilities, then larger ones. She had a sharp eye for inconsistencies, a leftover skill from a life spent looking for threats, and she wasn't afraid to point them out. She rented a small, clean studio apartment, the first place that had been truly hers. She paid back every cent Jason had spent on that first hotel room, leaving the cash in a sealed envelope on his desk with a simple note that read, "Paid in full. Thank you." He never mentioned it. One sunny afternoon, he found her in the break room, making a cup of tea. He leaned against the doorway. "I hear you're moving up. The logistics team wants to poach you from data entry." Sidney turned, a genuine smile touching her lips for what felt like the first time in forever. "I start next week." He nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "I also heard you handled a situation with Amber a while back." Sidney shrugged. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he said softly. "It was you standing your ground. On your own." He paused, looking at her not as a former homeless girl, but as an equal. "I'm proud of you, Sidney." The words settled in her chest, warm and solid. They didn't feel like charity. They felt earned. The following weekend, Sidney stood outside her new apartment building, a small suitcase at her feet. Jason pulled up in a car, not the flashy one from their first meeting, but something quieter, more understated. He got out and came to stand beside her. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" she said. He didn't offer to carry her bag. He understood that this was her journey, her victory. They stood there for a moment, two people from different worlds who had found an unexpected shelter in each other's quiet respect. He had given her a hand up, not a handout. She had given him a reminder of resilience and the power of a simple, honest chance. The future was no longer a cold bus stop. It was an open door, and she was finally ready to walk through it on her own terms. Of course, the coffee shop was called The Daily Grind, and it was everything the corporate chains were not. It was small, slightly shabby, and filled with the rich, earthy scent of properly roasted beans. Sidney had claimed a small, wobbly table in the back corner, a position that allowed her to see the entire room and the entrance. Old habits died hard. When Jason walked in at exactly 1 minute to 10, he looked different. The sharp corporate tension that usually held his shoulders rigid was gone. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and jeans, and he seemed younger, softer around the edges. His eyes found her immediately, and a small, genuine smile broke through his usual composed expression. He navigated the cramped space and slid into the chair opposite her. "You found a good spot," he said, glancing around. "It has character." "It has decent coffee that doesn't cost a day's pay," she corrected, a hint of her old dryness returning. But she was smiling, too. He laughed, a warm, easy sound she hadn't heard before. Even better. They ordered, a black coffee for him, a latte for her, and for a few moments, They sat in a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have shared a pivotal, unspoken moment. "The divorce is final, then?" Sidney finally asked, voicing the elephant in the room. "Signed, sealed, and delivered yesterday," he confirmed, stirring his coffee. "It's a strange feeling. Like a constant low-grade headache you didn't realize you had has finally vanished." "I'm glad for you," she said, and she meant it. She knew better than anyone the weight of a toxic presence in your life. "And you?" he asked, his gaze gentle, but direct. "How is the fortress?" The question surprised a laugh out of her. He remembered her word. "The fortress is secure. I even have a couch now. It's hideous and was probably rescued from a curb, but it's the most comfortable thing I've ever owned." "Excellent. A hideous couch is a cornerstone of any real home." He took a sip of his coffee. "And logistics? Are they still keeping you on your toes?" "It's good. Challenging. In a way that makes me feel—" She searched for the right word. "Useful. Actually useful. Not just busy." He nodded, understanding the profound difference. "I heard from Miller. He says you caught a discrepancy in the shipping manifests from the Singapore supplier that saved the department a small fortune. He wants to put you up for a promotion." Sidney felt a flush of pride, warm and bright. She hadn't known that. "I was just doing my job." "That's what the best people always say," he replied. He leaned back, studying her. "You look different, Sidney." She self-consciously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's the same jacket." "It's not the jacket," he said softly. "It's the eyes. They're not flat anymore. They're planning." The accuracy of his observation stunned her into silence. He was right. For years, her eyes had only ever held the present moment, the cold, the hunger, the immediate threat. Now they were looking forward, to a promotion, to buying a better coffee maker, to maybe one day getting a cat. The conversation drifted from work to books, to a ridiculous movie they'd both seen, to his dream of sailing the Greek islands. It was normal. It was breathtakingly, wonderfully normal. For 2 hours, Sidney wasn't an ex-homeless woman and he wasn't a wealthy CEO. They were just two people sharing coffee. As they stepped out onto the sunny sidewalk, Jason hesitated. "I have to ask," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "The money you left on my desk. The exact amount for the hotel." "Why?" Sidney looked down the street towards the direction of her apartment. "Because that night you gave me a hand. Not a leash. Paying it back. That was me letting go of the hand. It was me saying I was steady on my own feet." She met his gaze. It was important. He looked at her with a deep, unwavering respect. "I understand." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Well, I should let you get on with your Saturday." "And you," she said. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Sidney?" "Yeah? The next time. Coffee is on you." A real, unguarded smile spread across her face. "It's a deal." She watched him walk away until he turned the corner and disappeared. The city hummed around her, full of noise and life. She felt a part of it now, a single thread woven into its vast, complicated tapestry. She had a hideous couch waiting for her, a succulent that needed watering, and a future that was hers to design. The story of the bus stop was firmly in the past. The story of Sidney was just getting started, and every new page was a blank one, waiting for her to write it. She turned and walked home, her step light, the sun warm on her face. The promotion came through 3 weeks later. It was a new title, logistics coordinator, a modest pay raise, and a cubicle with a window that offered a sliver of a view between two taller buildings. To Sidney, it was the summit of a mountain she never thought she could climb. Her new responsibilities included liaising directly with shipping carriers, and she found a strange satisfaction in negotiating rates and tracking containers across oceans. It was a giant global puzzle, and she was good at solving it. Her life developed a rhythm, a stability that was intoxicating. Tuesday nights were for grocery shopping. Thursday evenings, she treated herself to takeout from the Thai place around the corner. It was on one of these Thursdays, balancing a bag of fragrant pad Thai, that she saw him, not Jason, a ghost from a different life. He was leaning against the brick wall near her apartment's entrance, his frame gaunt, his clothes hanging loose. Leo. They'd huddled together for warmth in a makeshift shelter under a bridge during her second winter on the streets. He'd shared his rotten food with her once when she was sick. He was kind, in a world that had little use for kindness. Now, his eyes, sunken and hazy, scanned the street without recognition. The sharp, intelligent man she'd known was buried, under a layer of grime and something harder, something chemical. Sidney's feet rooted to the pavement. Every instinct screamed to look away, to walk past, to protect the fragile sanctuary she had built, to let the past stay dead. But the memory of shared rotten apples and his chattering voice telling her stories to pass the long, cold nights held her fast. She walked towards him. Leo? His gaze drifted over her, then snapped back. There was a long, painful moment of confusion, and then a flicker of awareness. Sid? He whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Little Sid? What are you? You look clean. The word was a punch to the gut. I got out, Leo, she said, her own voice soft. He let out a wet, coughing laugh. Yeah, I see that. Fancy. He gestured vaguely at her neat jacket and the bag of food. The gulf between them felt wider and more terrible than any ocean. She was living a life he probably couldn't even imagine anymore. The guilt was a cold, sharp stone in her chest. Arbore. You hungry? She asked, her offer feeling pathetic, his eyes fixed on the takeout bag. Nah, I'm good. The pride of the streets, a brittle and deadly pride, was still intact. She knew better than to push. Offering money felt wrong, an insult to the man he had been. Instead, she acted on a raw, impulsive thought. There's a shelter, St. Bartholomew's. It's not like the others. They have real beds, and a doctor comes, on Fridays. She'd heard about it from a co-worker who volunteered there. It's on Elm and Fifth. You should go. Leo just shrugged, a gesture of profound hopelessness. Maybe. He was already fading, his attention drifting back to the void. Sidney knew this dance. She'd done it herself 1,000 times. Promises were empty calories. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Leo. You take care of yourself. He didn't reply. She walked past him, the key to her apartment feeling heavy in her hand. She unlocked the door, stepped into the quiet warmth of her hallway, and leaned against the wall, her heart hammering. The scent of pad Thai, once a treat, now turned her stomach. The encounter haunted her for days. She saw Leo's hollowed-out face in the patterns of her computer screen. His fate had so easily could have been her own. It was nothing but luck, a random meeting on a cold night, that had made the difference. The thought was terrifying. Toyas? Following Friday, instead of going straight home, she found herself walking toward St. Bartholomew's. She stood across the street, watching people file in. They were men and women, young and old, their postures slumped with the same weariness she knew so well. She saw a volunteer handing out towels, his face kind and patient. She didn't go in. She wasn't ready for that. But she went to a bank and withdrew $100 from her carefully managed savings. She walked back to the spot where she'd seen Leo. He wasn't there. She tucked the folded bills into a crevice in the brickwork, a place only someone who knew how to look would find. It wasn't a solution, it was an apology, a tribute, a tiny knot tied between her old life and her new one. That night, she texted Jason. It was the first time she had initiated contact outside of their planned coffee. Do you ever feel guilty? She typed, then deleted it. Too raw, too direct. She tried again. The company does charity work, right? The annual fundraiser? His reply came a few minutes later. Yes, We sponsor a children's hospital and a food bank. Why? She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. She was about to cross a new line, to weave a thread from her past directly into her present. I have a suggestion for next year, she typed slowly. There's a shelter, St. Bartholomew's. I've heard they do good work. She held her breath. This was it. This was her admitting, in a way she never had before, where she had come from. Jason's response was immediate and sure. Send me the details. I'll make sure it's on the list for the committee to review. It's a good suggestion, Sidney. And just like that, he accepted it. No questions, no awkwardness. He simply met her where she was, on this new, unsteady ground she was claiming. She put her phone down and looked around her apartment. It was still a fortress, but she was no longer just hiding inside it. She was starting to look out from the walls, and she was realizing that survival wasn't just about saving yourself. It was about remembering where you came from and throwing a rope back down, no matter how thin it might be. The fundraiser for St. Bartholomew's was set for early December. Sidney, to her own surprise, found herself not just a passive suggester, but a key organizer. Her logistics skills, honed on shipping manifests and supply chains, turned out to be perfectly suited to coordinating silent auction items, vendor contracts, and seating charts. She worked alongside a team of well-meaning, if sometimes overly cheerful, corporate volunteers who knew her only as the quiet, fiercely efficient woman from logistics. She never mentioned her connection to the shelter. It was her secret, a quiet engine driving her long hours and meticulous attention to detail. This wasn't just a company event. It was a personal atonement, a message in a bottle she was sending back to every Leo still lost in the dark. The night of the gala arrived. It was held in a glittering hotel ballroom, a world away from the diner where her journey with Jason had begun. Sidney stood at the edge of the room wearing a simple, dark blue dress she'd bought on sale. It was the first dress she'd owned in years. She felt a familiar, prickling sense of dislocation, the ghost of the bus stop girl watching. The shiny, happy people swirl past. Jason found her there, a fixed point in the churning social sea. He looked polished and commanding in his tuxedo, but his smile when he saw her was the same one from the coffee shop. "You're responsible for half the items in that silent auction," he said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "The board is impressed. Annoyingly so." "I just made some calls," she deflected, taking the glass. Her knuckles were white around the stem. "You built a system," he corrected gently. "That's what you do." He followed her gaze across the room to where the director of St. Bartholomew's, a woman named Clara with kind eyes and a firm handshake, was speaking to a small group. "Nervous? Does it show?" "Only to me," he said. "You look to everyone else, like you belong here completely." He paused. "Because you do." Before she could reply, a smooth, familiar voice cut through the air. "Well, isn't this a picture?" Amber. She was a vision in crimson silk, her smile a sharp, polished weapon. She ignored Sidney completely, her focus entirely on Jason. "Funding the flop houses now, Jason? I suppose it's a more hands-off approach than taking in strays personally." Her eyes flickered towards Sidney for a fraction of a second, dismissing. Her the old Sidney would have frozen or shrunk or let the words carve a new wound. The woman she was now felt a cold, clear calm settle over her. She didn't wait for Jason to defend her. She took a small step forward, placing herself directly in Amber's sightline. St. Bartholomew's has a 73% success rate in placing individuals in stable housing or rehabilitation programs within 6 months of intake, Ms. Thorne, Sidney said, her voice level and clear, carrying just enough to be heard by the people nearby. "Their financials are a matter of public record. I'd be happy to send you the prospectus. It's a sound investment in the city's human capital." Amber blinked, thrown off balance. She was used to provoking emotional reactions, not clinical data. The people she'd been talking to were now listening to Sidney with interest. "Human capital," Amber repeated, the words tasting sour. "How corporate of you." "It's a practical solution to a complex problem," Sidney replied. She allowed a small, professional smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, the bidding on the golf package, is closing soon, and I need to ensure the paperwork is in order." She gave a slight polite nod to Amber, a warmer one to Jason, and turned, melting back into the crowd. Her heart was thumping, but it was with the thrill of a battle cleanly won, not the panic of a skirmish survived. She had used the language of this world as her shield and her sword, and it had worked. Later, as the event wound down, Clara found her. The director's eyes were bright with emotion. "We just tallied the preliminary numbers," she said, gripping Sidney's hands. This will fund our winter outreach program twice over. You have no idea what this means. You've saved lives. Tonight." Sidney felt a lump form in her throat. She thought of Leo, of the hollow look in his eyes. She hadn't been able to save him, but maybe, because of this, someone else would be. "I'm glad I could help," she managed to say. As the crowd thinned, Jason appeared at her side again. "Ready to go?" She nodded. He didn't offer her a ride home. He simply walked with her out of the glittering ballroom and into the crisp, cold night. They walked in silence for a block, the sounds of the gala fading behind them, replaced by the honest noise of the city. "You were magnificent in there," he said finally. "I just stated facts. You stood your ground, on your own terms." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "You know, when I offered you that job, I thought I was giving you a chance. But I think I was the one who got lucky. The company is better for having you." They reached her apartment building. Sidney stopped at the base of the steps, looking up at the windows of her home. "Jason," she said, turning to him, "that night at the bus stop, why did you really stop? You could have walked to the gas station. You didn't need me." He was quiet for a long moment, his breath misting in the air. "I saw you," he said, his voice low. "And you looked unbreakable. And I was feeling so utterly broken that night by Amber's games, by the emptiness of it all. I think I thought if I could just get close to that kind of strength, some of it might rub off." He gave a self-deprecating shrug. "A selfish impulse, maybe?" Sidney shook her head. "No, it was human." She understood now. It hadn't been charity. It had been a transaction of need, a mutual shelter from different kinds of storms. "Good night, Jason," she said softly. "Good night, Sidney." She walked up the steps, her key in her hand. She didn't look back. Inside her apartment, she kicked off her heels and walked to the window. The city sprawled out below, a map of light and shadow, of struggle and survival. She was a part of it all now, not as a victim of its indifference, but as an architect of a small corner of it. She had a home. She had a career. She had a friend. And for the first time, she had a purpose that reached beyond her own four walls. The story of her rescue was over. The story of her life, rich, complicated, and entirely her own, was just beginning. The success of the gala solidified Sidney's place within the company in a way her promotion never could. She was no longer just the quiet, capable woman from logistics. She was the one who had delivered a flawless, high-profile event and handled a difficult situation with unflappable grace. The respect in her colleagues' eyes was now tinged with a hint of awe. A week later, she was summoned to a meeting with the head of her department and a woman from HR. They offered her a newly created position, Community Liaison and Strategic Logistics Coordinator. It was a role that would bridge the gap between the company's operational needs and its philanthropic ambitions, reporting directly to a senior VP. It came with a significant raise and an office with a full, unobstructed window. She accepted without hesitation. Her first official act in her new role was to formalize the company's partnership with St. Bartholomew's. She set up a volunteer program, organizing monthly teams from the office to help serve meals. She was always there, not as a supervisor, but as a participant. Her sleeves rolled up, her hands as capable with an industrial potato peeler as they were with a spreadsheet. It was on a blustery January afternoon during one of these volunteer shifts that she saw him again. He was at the end of the serving line, head down, shoulders hunched against an invisible wind. But he was cleaner. His hair was damp and combed back, and the jacket he wore, though worn, looked like it might actually be his size. "Leo," she said, her voice steady as she scooped mashed potatoes onto his tray. His head snapped up. The haze in his eyes had receded, replaced by a fragile, wary clarity. "Sid?" He looked at her hair, neatly tied back, her company-branded volunteer apron. He didn't seem surprised. "Heard this place got a windfall. Figured it was you." "It was a lot of people," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I found the money. In the wall. Bought this jacket." He paused, his gaze intense. "Got me in the door here." The simple statement felt like absolution. The $100, her tiny, desperate knot, had held. It hadn't saved him. He was saving himself, but it had been the first thread he'd grabbed onto. "They have a bed for me," he continued, his voice low. "In the sober living wing. Got a meeting with the job counselor tomorrow." Sidney could only nod, the lump in her throat making speech impossible. She saw the ghost of the man she'd known, under the bridge, the one who told stories to pass the time. He moved down the line, and she lost sight of him in the crowded hall. She finished her shift in a daze, the mundane act of wiping down tables feeling sacred. She hadn't pulled him out. She had simply held the door open, and he had found the strength to walk through it. That evening, she sat in her armchair, the succulent thriving on the windowsill, and looked at the business card still propped on her bookshelf. Jason's personal number. Their coffee meetings had become a semi-regular occurrence, a quiet anchor in both their weeks. But this felt different. This was a chapter she needed to close, not with him, but for herself. She picked up her phone. "Can we talk?" she typed. "I need to tell you a story." His reply was almost immediate. "Name the place." She didn't choose the diner or the daily grind. She chose a quiet park bench overlooking the river, the same river that flowed past the industrial underpass where she and Leo had once slept. It was cold, but the sun was out, glinting off the choppy, gray water. She told him everything, not just the edited highlights, but the brutal, unvarnished truth. The foster homes that had never felt like home. The slow, grinding despair that led to the streets. The constant, gnawing fear. The name-calling, the being looked through. She told him about Leo, about the rotten apples, about the hollow man she'd seen outside her apartment, and the fragile, sober one she'd seen in the soup kitchen line. She talked until her voice grew hoarse and the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Jason listened without interrupting, his presence a silent, steady force beside her. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and emotionally scraped raw, he didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say he was sorry. He simply sat with her in the weight of it all. After a long while, he spoke, his voice quiet. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me with that." "I needed you to know who I was," she said, her gaze fixed on the flowing water. "So you'd know who I am now." "I've always known who you are, Sidney," he said. The rest was just geography. The simplicity of it undid her. A single tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but the release had been real. They sat until the sky darkened and the city lights began to twinkle on the opposite shore. The past, finally laid to rest, no longer felt like a ghost haunting her present. It was just a story, a difficult, painful one, but one that had led her here, to this bench, to this life, to this quiet understanding with a friend. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice soft in the twilight. Sidney took a deep, clean breath of the cold air. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." She stood up, and together they walked away from the river, leaving the ghosts of the past to the quiet of the coming night. Her story wasn't about survival anymore. It was about living. And she was finally, completely, free to begin. Of course. Here is the rewritten final part, integrating the romantic culmination. The new role was a perfect synthesis of her skills and her purpose. Sidney navigated corporate boardrooms and shelter common rooms with the same quiet competence. She was a bridge, and she found she was uniquely qualified for the job. The ghosts of her past were no longer threats. They were her guides, reminding her where compassion needed to be applied with practical, logistical precision. It was at a high-stakes quarterly review meeting, where Sidney was presenting the year-to-date impact of the company's community partnerships, that Amber made her final, most brazen play. Sidney was at the podium, clicking through a slide showing the success metrics from St. Bartholomew's, when the conference room door opened. Amber stood there, not in a gown this time, but in a severe professional suit, a leather portfolio clutched in her hand. "Forgive the interruption," she said, her voice slicing through the room. She strode directly to the head of the table where Jason sat, his expression hardening into granite. "But before this presentation goes any further, the board needs to be aware of a significant conflict of interest." She turned, her finger pointing dramatically at Sidney. Her. A tense silence fell. Sidney lowered the clicker, her posture straight and calm. "Ms. Thorne, this is highly inappropriate," Jason said, his voice dangerously low. "Is it?" Amber distributed a single sheet of paper to each board member. "This is a matter of public record. Police reports, shelter intake logs from the Hope Center from 5 years ago, all for a Sidney Miller, a known homeless person, a vagrant with a history of petty theft and disorderly conduct." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. And Jason didn't just hire her. He found her on the street. He took her to a hotel, bought her clothes, gave her a job. He is personally, financially, and unethically entangled with an employee he plucked from the gutter. This entire community liaison position is a sham, created to funnel company resources to his personal charity case. The board members looked from the paper to Sidney, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Jason stood, his knuckles white on the table. "That's enough." But before he could say another word, Sidney's voice, calm and clear, filled the room. "Thank you, Ms. Thorne, for saving me the trouble of an introduction to my own past." All eyes snapped to her. There was no shame on her face, no anger, only a profound, unshakable certainty. "Everything on that paper is true," Sidney stated, meeting the gaze of each board member. 5 years ago, I was homeless. The Hope Center log is from the night I was admitted with hypothermia. The police report is from when I was arrested for sleeping on a park bench. Disorderly conduct is the charge they use when you have nowhere else to go. She picked up her own copy, glanced at it, and set it down. It's an accurate, if incomplete, resume. She picked up the clicker. What it doesn't show is the quantitative data. The 73% success rate at St. Bartholomew's, which our funding helped achieve. It doesn't show the 15% reduction in operational costs in the logistics department after I streamlined the shipping protocols. It doesn't show the employee satisfaction score for the new volunteer program, which is 94%. She advanced the slide to a graph of the company's positive PR. She looked directly at Amber. "You're right about one thing. Jason did find me. He saw a human being who was cold and offered a meal. He saw potential and offered a job with a 30-day trial, just like any other hire. He gave me a chance to succeed or fail on my own merit. The only thing he's guilty of is recognizing that a person's worth isn't determined by the worst period of their life." She finally looked at Jason. His gaze was fixed on her, filled with a respect so deep it was like a physical force. "The only sham here," Sidney concluded, her voice softening but losing none of its power, "is the idea that where I came from makes me less capable, or that Jason's compassion is a weakness. In my experience, it's his greatest strength, and it's this company's greatest asset." She clicked off the projector. "My presentation is finished. Are there any questions about the data?" There were none. Only a stunned, respectful silence. One of the senior board members, an older woman named Eleanor, slowly ripped the paper Amber had given her in half. I think we've seen all the data we need. Thank you, Ms. Miller. That was the most compelling business case for empathy I have ever witnessed. Amber stood, isolated and defeated. Without a word, she turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her with a sound of finality. Later that evening, Jason found Sidney standing by the large window in her new office, looking out at the city lights. The silence between them was different now, charged with the electricity of what had been laid bare. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly from the doorway. "I know," she said, turning to face him. "But this was my battle to fight. Not as your employee, but as your—" She hesitated, the right word hovering between them. "Friend?" he offered, stepping fully into the room. The word, which had once meant so much, now felt insufficient. Sidney shook her head slowly. "That doesn't seem to cover it anymore, does it?" He was standing right in front of her now, close enough for her to see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. "No," he agreed, his voice soft. "It doesn't." He lifted his hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch a silent question. Her eyes fluttered closed for a second at the contact. When she opened them, her answer was in her gaze. She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. The space between them vanished. The kiss was not desperate or frantic, but a slow, deep, and perfect culmination. It was a conversation that needed no words, a testament to cold bus stops and warm diners, to quiet respect and public defiance, to a shelter found in the most unexpected of places. It was full of the relief of battles won and the profound peace of finally, truly, being seen and chosen. When they finally parted, foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably shifted. "I was wrong, you know," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "That night at the bus stop, I thought I was getting close to your strength. I didn't realize I was inviting a hurricane into my life." Sidney's smile was radiant. "Is that a good thing?" "It's the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said, and sealed the promise with another softer kiss. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice husky. Sidney looked around the office, at the city lights beyond, and finally back at the man who had seen her strength in the dark and had never once tried to dim its light. "Yes," she said, her heart full. "Take me home." And as they walked out together, hand in hand, the story of the rescue was complete. The story of their life together, a partnership of equals, built on unshakable trust, and a love forged in the coldest of nights, was just beginning.